Okay, so I think this session was a good introduction after the presentation of the Director General of ICRAM. So I think would like to open the floor for those who have comments, questions, or yeah, we have Dr. Iman Asi from.
Yes. Thanks a lot. I have two comments or questions for Khalila and Mr. Fadel. Yes. For your presentation, it was really very nice to use this documentation for World Heritage Site. And I don't know how can this be really effective tool for monitoring for World Heritage Sites? Did you contact World Heritage Center to be really as periodic reporting, monitoring? I mean, how can you work with World Heritage? This is really very important. Because
this is the first question, I believe. I think you have another question.
The next
for Khalila,
question for Khalila. I mean, you have shown a lot of documentation in really a conflict zone. And to do a documentation, I think it will really take a lot of fund. I mean, you have first to find some funding agencies. But I mean, I remember in Palestine when we did the damage assessment in 2003, I mean, it takes like 2 months to do it, and like 200 people, students and architects to do it. And we did it by our own. Suppose that you want to do something in, in an area which doesn't have a fund. What do you do? I mean, you should think of these areas. I mean, the unprivileged
they don't have
areas.
Funding.
Yes.
How do you work in areas with no funds? Okay, we'll start with Manuel, I think.
So to clarify, everything that we have done so far in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, most of that data is available either in our websites or in the IMENA website. In the IMENA website, you will be able to find in a couple of weeks, once the report is published, the detailed analysis for the ancient city of Aleppo. And then hopefully next year, middle of the year or at the end of the year, we're going to publish a full report on Syria, and that data is going to be available as well on the IMENA website. For the what I just presented, what we have done so far is only a pilot program with the help of CERN. CERN is the European Center for Physics Nuclear Research, and Google Inc. To see the feasibility of doing this monthly assessment on every culture or World Heritage Site around the world. So we know that the system works. What we're looking for now is for funding to actually implement the project.
Thank you, Manuel. Khalila?
Yes, thank you for your question. Just to complement what Manuel just said, I mentioned Pompeii. Pompeii is a very, very large archaeological site in Italy. It's very difficult to monitor, to actually know what's going on the site, because it's about 12 square kilometers. And we, back in 2013, we did the first large-scale scan of Pompeii in 3D. And the site managers were really interested in using this for regular monitoring. And at the time, it was a bit more expensive than it is today. And in 2003, I can imagine it was very time-consuming, very expensive. Now, just to give you a practical example, we can record a World Heritage Site of average size in 2 to 3 days. And we have teams on the field of two people, one with drone, one on the ground. So it's with very light equipment, cameras and small drones. And then, of course, you need time for processing all these images. We have projects with up to 150,000 images to be processed with specific 3D softwares. So, but the cost has gone down a lot. And I shouldn't say that, but we can afford to work in places where there is no funding. We do it occasionally. But just to give you an idea, to record and process all images for site, heritage site of average size, it's $25,000, all included, emission costs included. So it's gone down a lot because you can work so quickly on the field, and then processing has improved as well. So you can have a very, very good project. For example, the island, actually, the Greek island, it was around that price, 25,000. So just for a whole island. So people tend to imagine that it's a lot more expensive than it is, and it's very quick as well. So occasionally we work in places where there is absolutely no funding. But for Libya, for example, we had a corporate sponsor. So you always find ways to cover the cost.
Thank you very much, Khalila. I think the costs are going down every year. I remember few years ago, everything was really costly to use 3D laser scanning, or now things are more affordable. More questions? Comments? Okay, Rand Epic.
Sorry to dwell on costs again, but a question for Yunosat. Really fantastic presentation. I can see how... Oh, okay. Thank you. A question for you, because really a fantastic presentation. I can see how it would be very helpful to monitor these sites all over the world. But again, the cost. I mean, you have agreements with these satellite companies. I mean, it seems like they could make a special deal for us, no, in Heritage, because I know they're very expensive, the satellite images.
Yeah. The one reason why we think the project is actually feasible is because we have an agreement with Digital Globe and the U.S. government that they provide the imagery for free. So that's, but then
over time, they have it over time. They give it to you over time.
Yeah, we have access to the full image library from Digital Globe. The problem is that then to actually implement the program, we need funding. We were able to fund the pilot program to actually do the testing and see if it was actually feasible to do it. But the implementation is difficult because of lack of funding, yeah.
And it's just from their library, or will they task a satellite for you?
Sorry?
It's just from their library of pre-captured images, or will they task a satellite for you?
Good question. It's only for archive imagery, yeah, no tasking. But Digital Globe usually in areas where heritage site is damaged, they collect very frequently. So we don't think it's going to be an issue.
Great, thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Rand, for the question. We have more questions now. I have Miss Titi, I think, and Bob.
شكرا أول إشي، شكرا على العرض التقديمي. في عندي سؤال كوني من منطقة نزاع، من خلال استخدام البرامج في كثير مواقع كنا نجد صعوبة من الصور الجوية إن نكشف عنها أو نشوفها. في آلية مستقبلا إنه هاي الصور يتم إنه نستطيع أن نشوف شو موجود في هذا الموقع، ما يكون عندنا مشفر بشكل كامل.
ما يكون شو؟
مشفرة، الصورة بتكون مشفرة، ما ببين فيها أي شيء يعني.
The question of Miss Titi is related to the fact that they are on the ground. They have some difficulty accessing the satellite images. Sometimes these images are not accessible, so they have certain code to access. So is there any way that we could overcome this problem in the future? I think the question is for you, Emmanuel.
The problem with satellite images is that they are licensed. So with the current agreement that we have with the U.S. government and Digital Globe, we can provide images for free to UN organizations and to NGOs. Apart from that, sometimes we have been able to provide imagery, but with special permission.
Bob?
Thank you, and thank you all for the presentations. My question is something that we often think about in the Endangered Archaeology Project, which is I'd like your comments on whether there's the infrastructure to be able to receive the data that you've created. And it's similar to the question that's just been asked, because it's one thing for the information to be available on our computers and our laptops, but is the infrastructure there in all the places that you've worked? And I'm thinking also about Econom, so that the data created can be used by the people who need to use it.
I think in the case of UNOSAT, we have a unique opportunity, and is that the fact that UNOSAT is a place at CERN. So we have access to CERN's IT infrastructure, which in Europe and I think worldwide is unique because it's definitely cutting edge. So we have access to the full IT infrastructure, including server space, internet, privileged internet access. For example, we can download satellite images in a matter of seconds. And usually if you download a satellite images from home, it's going to take you hours, if not days, just to give you an example.
Thank you, Manuel. You want to say something else, Bob? Oh.
You're totally right. It's important when we train local archaeological services. For example, we train the State Board of Antiquities in Iraq, and we totally adjust it to the kind of equipment they have. They know there's no point in getting training for equipment that you don't have on the ground in the long term. So, and we created a dedicated viewer, 3D viewer for the State Board of Antiquities, taking account of, well, a lot of people didn't even have laptops, they work with their smartphones a lot. So, and the good thing is you can now view 3D on a smartphone. So we make the most of what technology offers today.
Thank you, Khalila. I see there are two more questions from this side, France Desmarais and then George Richards. Do we have any more questions that I haven't seen? And there's a lady over there. So let's start with France. For the translation, please, yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Zaki. First, congratulations. I'm happy to see the progress that this field has made. I sometimes think I may have planted the idea of satellite imagery monitoring for cultural heritage to previous leadership at UNOSAT 7 years ago. So I'm really happy this has been picked up and is being generalized. I would have one comment and one question. Now that it is being generalized, do you have a strategy to make sure that there's no duplication or overlap? Because when you are monitoring a site or a country, how do we make sure that another organization with very little resources is not also trying to do the same while they could be using those funds or those efforts or resources? We know that we're in a field that has very little resources, and we need to make sure we try to avoid duplication and we try to work together as much. So this would be my question, and my comment would really be, I'm glad my colleague raised this question about access to images. I think ethically we should not be monitoring sites of countries and not giving them access to those images. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that international organizations such as mine and NGOs such as the one I used to work at would have access to those images while the main people concerned would not. Ethically, I think it's something we really need to take into consideration.
Okay, so maybe you have to answer this question first, and then we move to the next question.
Regarding the use of access of imagery, sadly these are commercial vendors and they have limitations to the uses of imagery. And the current agreement only allows us to share the imagery with the UN and NGOs organizations. But just to give you an indication, on most occasions when we do ask for special access of imagery for, let's say, countries, we recently received a request from Afghanistan to access imagery, and the access was granted, and we gave them over 100 images for different cultural heritage sites. So the access is there. It's just a matter of that we have to go through the process of requesting it. Yeah.
Thank you, Manuel. Another time. Now, George.
Thank you. A related question to some of the others that have been asked just now. regarding the data itself. And apart from the access to the imagery, as Franz was just asking, a question that we've been thinking about at Arjamil is how can we make sure that, as well as training local communities in the techniques for documenting cultural heritage, and Ikonem, I know you've done some great work in this, how can we then train local communities also in the data processing side and the management of the data, so that not only having access to those to that data, but also potentially locating this data physically, the servers in the region, not having it outside, and making sure that people in this part of the world, if it's sites in this part of the world, have the skills necessary to be able to manage and organize, archive that data themselves, rather than that whole side of the work being left outside of the region. Because I think what often happens is that there's a big focus on training people in photogrammetry, etc., and then the next stage is almost kept opaque and closed box to people from this part of the world. So I think that's something that as a group here we need to also be thinking of. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very good question, George. I don't know which speaker would like to answer this. It's a general question. Who wants to start?
Very quickly, you're perfectly right, and data processing is key. And what the problem obviously is computing power in those countries is very difficult to process large data sets. So what we do is we train. We always have a session on data processing, but for objects or for architectural details, because that's the maximum that computers in those countries can take. Unfortunately, when we train archaeologists in Afghanistan, it's without internet connection. So so data processing, unfortunately, for large data sets is still made remotely in Europe.
Thank you very much. I think, do you want to add anything? Nothing? All right, okay, well, there was another question over there, yes.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أشكر كل القائمين على هذا المؤتمر، فيه معلومات مهمة. أنا ما عندي ولا سؤال، وأذكركم في مقولة أبونا الشيخ زايد: ما له ماضي ما له حاضر. شكرا.
Shukran. That was just a comment that thanking everybody for this important conference, and also quoting Sheikh Zayed, and this is the year of Sheikh Zayed, who stated once that those who don't have the past, they don't have the present. Thank you very much for this comment, and maybe with this comment we end this first session. I'd like to have you all join me to thank the speakers for this first session. Manuel, Khalila, and Hamidreza. Please join me to thank them.